A warm welcome, Thomas, and look forward very much to hearing what you have to say about ravens and their politics.
Thanks very much indeed, and thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Well, as already said, I'm now switching gears a little bit and would like to introduce you to the birds world. But first, the topic. So I'm personally interested in social cognition. It has already popped up a couple of times that there is something about social life. That's exactly what I'm looking at. And it was in the 60s and 70s of the last century that Alison Jolly and Nick Humphrey came up with the notion that there is something with, about the social life that is really challenging, namely individuals are intentional beings. And because of this, their behavior is very flexible, and so they act spontaneously, they behave spontaneously, and this makes their behavior quite difficult to predict in comparison to inanimate objects, for instance. And even worse, conspecifics also respond to being acted upon. So for instance, if you find food, it's maybe difficult to find, but eventually if you have your banana, you can go and take it and eat it. But just consider now you have the same thing with a conspecific. So a conspecific has found the banana before you. So you want to have the banana, you cannot just go there and push the conspecific away. I mean, potentially you can, but it's quite likely that he might strike back. So this is exactly the problem here. So the behavior is difficult to predict, and they may respond to what you do with them. And the general idea now is that the more complex life becomes, the better individuals need to become in coping with these type of problems. And this should then have an effect on the processing capacities or the brain, and the brain, or particular areas of the brain. And even though this hypothesis is rather intuitive, there is still a problem, because we really don't know exactly what's meant with complexity in social life, and we also don't know exactly what type of processing capacities has been selected for. And that's exactly what I'm personally interested in, what I'm working on. Now, this idea of a social brain has been proposed originally for primates, or it has been developed on primates, this idea, and then it has been applied to other mammal species. We have already heard about some of them today, like dolphins or the social carnivores, hyenas in this case, elephants. We are going to hear something more. And it was about 15 years ago or so that people have started applying this idea also to some birds, in particular birds from the group of parrots and of the group of corvids. And the interesting thing here is that the last common ancestor between mammals and corvids is said to have lived around 300 million years ago. Okay, if you compare it to octopus or things, it's a little bit closer, but still it's a long time ago. So if you now find some particular skills in some mammal species and some bird species, not in all, but only in some, this is very unlikely to go back to a common ancestor. It's much more likely that this is the result of what's called convergent evolution, meaning that certain selection pressures may favor certain mental skills. And for me personally now, the cool thing in studying birds is because now we can test the idea that has been proposed on primates, on the basis of studies on primates, independently of phylogeny when we study birds. And that's exactly what's my take on this, why I find it so cool. Yeah, it has already been said that my main study system has been the big black birds out there. In this case, it's the common raven. It's the biggest one. And ravens are, then of course, then I'm supposed to tell you why ravens. And this is also a question which I get very often. The point is, I can come up now talking, but there are two main points. First, you can have a look at the neural substrate, so they do have large brains. If you can count the cells, which has recently been done, and it turns out they also have a lot of cells in their brain. So it seems that they have the basic equipment to come up with quite some interesting behaviors and cognitive solutions. And from an ecological point of view, they are very flexible. So they are basically distributed across the whole northern hemisphere worldwide. And you can find them in basically every habitat. So they occur down there in the deserts, they occur up there in the Arctics, They occur in the woodlands as well as in the farmlands, so basically everywhere. And one of the reasons for this is because they have such a broad diet. They can more or less eat everything. Nevertheless, they have a strong preference, and this is meat. If they have the chance, they go for meat. And these are songbirds after all, so they're not adapted to actually hunt themselves. So they have to find other means to get to meat. And so this is a resource which is highly valuable and heavily competed for. And this is exactly when what they basically do is that they very often gang up. So they actually do what's called social foraging. So they join others or team up with others. And then this helps them quite nicely to get access to meat eventually. But when they have access, they start competing. And this is what I started looking at them. And here I was really surprised in the first results, because it turned out that the birds do show quite elaborate socio-cognitive skills in competition for food, in particular in competition for hidden food. It has already been mentioned briefly today. What they do very often is that they cache food for later consumption. And this is what I mean here. And for instance, what they can do is that they withhold information, potentially even provide false information. And a nice example of withholding information is when a raven caches food and sees another raven nearby without food, it's very likely to stop. Or if possible, if there is an obstacle around, like a rock or so, he goes behind it and continues caching over there, suggesting that he is taking into account what the other one can or cannot see. There is an alternative explanation to this, but nevertheless, this is a kind of a suggestive interpretation. Based on these suggestive interpretations, we kept on testing whether they actually can take the other's perspective, potentially even attribute knowledge to other ones. So this was the first study which we did, where we had 3 ravens, and 2 of them can watch a human making a cache in a big room, in a room of half of the size of this room here. And the 3rd raven was present as well, but he couldn't see because we blocked his view at that particular time. And when you, a little bit later, allow this one of the 2 that could see the cache being made go into this room, either with another one who has also seen this, or with the 3rd one who hasn't seen that, then our focus subject behaves as if, if he knows what the other ones know. So he basically he speeds up. When he is going with another one who has seen, boom, then he makes a beeline to the cache, tries to be the first. Whereas when he goes with another one who is ignorant, he does like this. And waits until the ignorant is far away from the cache, and then he goes and waits. And the precondition for this is that the 2 competitors are dominant to our focus subject. Only then you can see these kind of things. So this was pretty cool, and the nice thing was also that they don't do this all the time, but they do this only at a certain development stage or age. And to put it in a nutshell, what they actually, the skills they show in this particular context, competing for hidden food, was comparable to what we have seen from apes. And I also have to say that very similar skills have been found in another corvid species, the western scrubjay. So ravens are not alone in doing these kind of things. But anyway, the critique what we got was, okay, but it's amazing what the birds can do here, but this is very specialized. It's a response to, and it's an adaptive specialization to this particular context of competing over cached food, and that's actually what drives the whole game. And I was one of those actually who was proposing this originally. And this is certainly a possibility. However, there's a second one, namely that what we see here is just a small piece of a bigger puzzle. And this bigger puzzle has to do with the complexity of social life, which is not only about competition, but also about cooperation and knowing about social relationships and networks. And this later interpretation appealed quite much to me eventually. However, there was then another problem, because if you look it up in the literature, then there's basically hardly anything to support this second claim. So that's exactly what brought me to my current to my recent program, which was called Raven Politics, and where I tried to answer these 3 questions, namely how complex is a raven's social life actually, what do the birds know about other ravens, and how do they use this knowledge in their daily life. Now let's go through all these 3 questions step by step. Let me introduce you now to my field site. This is in Austria. These are the Austrian Alps, the northern part. Actually, here is south, here is north. This is a valley of the river Alm, and here we have a small research station, a field site of the University of Vienna, which is called the Konrad Lorenz Research Station. And luckily, right across the river here is a small local zoo, the Cumberland Wildpark. And in this zoo, in this area around the zoo, you can frequently observe ravens, basically on a daily basis. And we try to catch them and mark them, and that's the reason why you see some colored dots on their wing. These are wing tags. And on the basis of these wing tags, we can identify them. And we actually then found out, had a look, who are those ravens that hang out here? And most of them are rather young birds. Some of them are already sexually mature, but they don't have any partners yet. Some of them are already sexually mature, have partners, but they don't have a breeding territory yet. Because for the breeding biology, they need to defend a certain area. And when there is no area to defend anymore, then the birds stay in what we call non-breeder groups. So the groupings, so the ravens that we find here are basically non-breeders. And it was then Anna Brown, who was one of my PhD students, my first PhD students, having a look at the composition of those groups. She was then showing that there is a high fission, what we call fission-fusion dynamic, basically meaning that these groups are not stable entities, but there's a high fluctuation, there's a coming and going. In particular, and this, on the one hand, during the day, so in the morning they may join each other for foraging, then they may go again, then they may join each other in the evening for roosting. And during the day, basically, they can decide with whom to hang out, and here they are very selective. But there is a second level to the dynamics, and this is then when you look over the course of weeks, months, years. And here the decision for the ravens is to either spend time in this valley, in this site, or to go somewhere else. And what Anna found out is that there are quite some ravens. In her case, it was about 1/3 of the marked birds, and this was at that time 150, so around 50 birds. They had a strong preference for staying here. So they were basically meeting each other on a daily basis for several years. So we basically found that there are local subgroups. And Matthias Loreto, in the follow-up PhD then on the wild ravens, could show that when the birds leave our valley, they have also a high probability of, certain birds have a high probability of meeting each other again at different places. So now this is a zoomed out map. So this part here would be here. And these are data that we collected with birds that have GPS tags on their shoulders. So we can actually look where they are going. And each line represents the area which the particular raven visited rather frequently. And each color represents different individuals. And just check out here. You have the brown, the purple, and the pink one, and you can find them here, you can find them here, you can find them here. So they go, even though they go in different places, they have high chances to meet each other. And so either they meet on the same place or at different places. The point is that even though we have a strong fluidity in the system, there are certain units where individuals hang out with each other or join each other repeatedly again. And this is the basis for social relationships to form. Now, if in respect to social relationships, I'm particularly interested in the affiliative ones, basically the nice ones if you want to. And these are the behaviors which you are actually then looking for. Grooming, this in the birds we call it breeding normally, and especially giving another one a massage. And then different types of body contact, sometimes very often looking like play. And these type of interactions you see between pair-bonded birds. So when you have a partner, of course, then they do it with each other. And pair-bonded birds, so we talk about pair partners when they are reproductively active. However, you can find these kind of behaviors building up social relationships also at the non-breeder state already. So also the younger birds do this. And when they do this with kin, we may talk about siblings. When we do this with non-kin, so non-related individuals, we may call them friends. And for the purpose of this talk, I combine these two categories and call them bonds, bonded individuals. Now, Ola Fraser, one of the postdocs in my lab, former postdocs, I have to admit, she checked these kind of patterns that make up these bonds, and because we wanted to know if those bonds, when we talk about bonds in ravens, if this is really comparable to when we talk about bonds in primates, for instance. And she did this kind of comparison and found out it's almost identical, so very, very similar. The concept of social bond is basically the same in these different groups. However, what we have in the birds is that the number of bonding partners per time unit is much smaller as we are used to from primate work. So they basically have 1, 2 friends at a time, maybe up to 5, but that's it. When birds are bonded, they do rise in rank, so they become more dominant, and this is most likely because they do support each other in fights. So this was what we found out in the beginning. And then the big question is, okay, now what do they know about each other? And the first thing that we actually checked is, do they recognize individuals that are actually familiar to them and non-familiar to them? Or can they also tell apart who is their friend and who is not their friend? And we used playback studies for doing these kind of things. This was particular, those 2 PhD students, Markus Böckler and Georgine Sippel, who did these studies, and they found out that basically, yes, it doesn't matter in which context we were testing, they could do that. Very nice. But the really interesting question was not so much if they can actually deal with their own relationship, but we wanted to know if they also understand the relationship about other individuals. In this case, if this bird here knows that those 2 that are playing with the ball are potentially friends. And this is called third-party understanding. And so we want to know if they actually have this, if they have a representation about other relationships in their head, and if so, then we want also to know how they are going to use it under field conditions. Now, how to test this? And here now I'm going to briefly describe you an experiment which I did together with Joch Massen and Andrius Paschukonis, a postdoc and a former PhD in our lab. And we used the fact that we set up a big new outdoor lab with a lot of aviaries, and at a certain time we had 2 raven groups housed next to each other. Let's call them the yellow and the blue group. And they were housed next to each other for a year. They could see each other, they could hear each other, but they could not really interact with each other. I mean, they could interact with members of their own group, but not with each other. So what we then did is that we used a particular display, which ravens really like to do, and this is basically a show-off display. The dominant guys that really want to tell the other ones that they're nuts, and they say, I'm cool, I'm cool, I'm cool. And eventually then the subordinate says, yes, I know, I know, I know. And I would have had a playback, but unfortunately this doesn't work, so it's basically like, cool, cool, yes, I know, okay? And this is actually a display which is multimodal, so they do it visually and auditory. So we just record the auditory part and put it in our computer and then played it back to a bird of that group. So a bird from yellow group, we played back an interaction of bird A saying I'm cool and bird B saying I know. And this was in this case correct. So we wouldn't expect him to respond very strongly to that playback. However, we could also reverse the order. So in this case, suddenly bird B, which is actually subordinate, saying I'm cool, and bird A is actually dominant, saying, oh, I know. And if this guy here has a representation about the other's relationship in his mind, he should be surprised. And this is something which we could measure potentially. That's the idea behind it. And because of our setup here, we could do the whole thing, not only to the birds within their own group, but also test birds from the neighboring group, if what they know about the others. To the results. Let's focus first when we did this playback of a simulated rank change. That's actually what the whole thing is about, to birds of their own group. And very nice result, exactly as predicted. Here we have the response when they hear the expected version, and here when they hear the unexpected version. And up here you have the relative amount of self-directed behavior. This is basically when they're shaking, grooming a little bit, and these kind of things. So basically when they are a little bit nervous or slightly aroused. And you can see that they are more aroused than when they hear this unexpected version. They also become more active, and here we have an interaction with the sex of the birds when they hear an unexpected version, which involves birds of your own sex. Then they become more active, flying around, potentially looking for what's going on over there. It doesn't be the case if it concerns the birds of the different sex. This makes a lot of sense because the rank hierarchy of ravens is males up, females down, and they actually always compete particularly within their own sex for the rank positions. Very nice results so far. Then what's about response to a playback which concerned members of the other group? And here we were surprised, I have to admit. We originally anticipated, we were hoping that they show a result, but we thought that it's just the same result as with their own group, but a little bit weaker. But the big surprise was that we got completely different story. First of all, have a look on the behaviors. There are different behaviors. Now it's about calling back, and now it's about looking in the direction of the loudspeaker, basically. In both cases, we have an interaction effect, and the whole result was basically driven by the males. So the males were responding very much to our condition, not so much the females. This is what we don't understand really in this case. I have to admit that one. And the next thing is that they were responding more to the expected condition as compared to the unexpected condition, which was also a little bit puzzling for us. Nevertheless, we went then back and had a look at other playback studies which we did, and it turned out that they are songbirds after all, so they do comment on what they know, but they are silent when they something they don't know. And this is exactly the pattern we found, at least in the males here. So I can sum up this particular experiment that the birds do differentiate between playbacks that do and do not violate the rank relations of other ravens, that the responses differ when the violations concern their own group as compared to the other group. This was a really cool result, I would say. And this means also that they represent the others' rank relations, and they seem capable of doing this already by mere observing them, in case you accept that that our unexpected results, which we have to interpret post-hoc, are available for the outgroup results. Anyway, so this was pretty good. We can show in captivity that they actually can represent some kind of other relations. So then the big question was, how do they use this under field conditions? And now we are going back to Grüner in the Alps and having a look what the birds are actually doing. And the first thing what we thought about is, okay, let's have a look at conflicts and when the third party is helping. So I have two ravens fighting, and here we have our third party, and this already on the way to intervene in this conflict and help one of the two. And here ravens can be quite opportunistic. So it could be, so it is actually like this. So if this third party is not bonded to either of the two fighting individuals here, then it's typically helping the aggressor. However, if this third party is bonded to one of the two, then it's helping its bonding partner, also when the bonding partner is the victim. And this is, and in this way, they may very often change the outcome of the fight, actually. So this is something which we just confirmed, but then we got something which was even, which was even nicer, namely that the victim, when a raven gets attacked, it may utter, or they may utter what we call defensive calls. And this is actually how they look like. It's their short calls, and they can give them in sequence. Let's have a look if it's working. Yeah, thanks. It's working. So I just play it once again. So you hear a raven calling like mad here. And the nice thing is that Georgine Siebel could show that they modify whether or not they call and how much they call, depending who is in the intermediate audience. So if their own body is in the audience, they call like mad, as I just played. So, whereas when the body of the aggressor is in the audience, they are shut up. And they try at least to shut up. Sometimes they do, but that's it. So the first result suggests that they know who of their own good relationships are around. Whereas the second result suggests, or confirms actually, that they actually also take into account the relationship between others. Very nice. But nevertheless, this is something which we also know from other mammal species in particular, and it goes in the direction of politics if you want, but not really. So we were very, very happy if we got these type of observations now. And it's still Georgine Siebel and Wolf, plus she got help by two internship students, Michela Spreafico and Ake Kok from Italy and from the Netherlands. And they actually were originally out there and helping us to observe any kind of affiliative interactions. Here you can see two ravens grooming and playing. And what they found is then that it might be that under such conditions, certainly a third raven comes, goes in between and makes them stop. In this case, only one has to go. Very often, both have to go. And we then had a look at these kind of patterns, and we were surprised how often this actually occurs. So it's about 1/3 of the affiliative interactions, and we are talking about quite some numbers here, and also quite some numbers of individually marked ravens involved. So we can really say it's not only always the same individual who is doing this. So it's happening quite often, and most interestingly, bonding status affects very clearly who shows this kind of third-party interventions, who breaks the other ones up, and who receives these kind of interventions. Those who are actually acting, who are breaking up, are those that are bonded themselves, very well bonded themselves, very well socially integrated, and this dominant. Those who actually get the interventions are those that are just becoming closely bonded. They have new bonds, and they are the ones that are targeted all the time. So what we then think of what's going on, let's put it the other way, let me sum up what I can say so far is that the bonding leads to an increase in the rank or status, but it also leads to an increase in receiving aggression from other bonded ravens. And these interventions in affiliate interactions of others may function to prevent these others from forming and or maintaining their bonds. So what we think what's going on is basically that they really use the ability to check out other relationships and then try to act against it. So try to actually to prevent them from becoming strong or potential competitors for status. And I have to admit that these interpretations rely on observations, so these are correlative data. So we still have to put the causation in to really prove that we are right. So we have to do experiments, and they are currently pending. That's it. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I won't ever look at the ravens in the trees outside the department in the same light again.
They're crows or rooks, so different species.
Yes, it's true. Yes, Margareta.
Does the male have only one female, or a male can have many females?
Yeah, no, a male has always so when they officially they have always one. So when they are reproducing, so when they have formed a pair bond and become territorial, then it's only two, male, female. When they are in the non-breeder groups, a male has usually one close female friend, which doesn't mean that he cannot also play around with other females. However, it's actually much worse from the female side. So if I have a look at the females, for the males it's fine. For the males it's important to have one strong ally who is helping. For the females it's important to have to make sure that you can help at any time. So what the females do is they go for one very good friend, potentially a forthcoming mate, but then they have at least 2, 3, 4 that are not so bad friends either. So depending who is around, they are using this one or that one, which makes sense because the males are up in the hierarchy and the females are down. And if the females are bonded, they go up. But they are only up as long as they receive help from their bonding partner. So if the bonding partner is not around, they're down again. So it's better for them to go for more, at least when they're in the non-breeder state. When they're in the breeder state, then officially it's 1-1, and we haven't really checked this yet. Mm-hmm.
Another question? Yes.
Okay. I got the impression from the calls, like the one says I'm cool and the other says yes I know, that what the call means depends on where it comes. So if it comes first, it means I'm cool. If it comes after that, it means yes I know. Because otherwise, if you switch them around, they're saying yes I know, I'm cool, and maybe that's a bit confusing.
Very
and
good one.
the other. So is that the case that it's the same? The yes I know and the I'm cool calls are the same. It just depends on the order.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the playback didn't work. But so I have to say that the way they say I'm cool is very, very different. Each one uses different calls for doing so. I mean, they can use the same calls, but they really prefer to differentiate from each other. We call them the SAD clusters, or the self-aggrandizing display cluster, where you can put every call in which you don't know what they can do. And the nice thing, the weird thing, or the interesting thing about this is they can copy sounds. They are production learners, so they basically can listen to whatever they hear, they like it, they start copying it, and they use it as a call for showing off that that's me, I'm cool. So in this case, for each combination, we actually record it under daily life conditions, the individuals when they are saying, I'm cool. So we had one saying, kikok, kikok, the other one saying, the next one saying, brrr. So these kind of things, you know. So we had from everyone, I'm cool. And I know is a different call, and this I know call is the standard defensive call, basically. This is what everyone gives. So we also recorded this call from everyone. And then we just swapped things around, in the sense that it's the defensive call is always standard, and just who is saying I'm cool was depending on which call we used from which individual. And so this is what, and just to make sure that it's not completely out of the bun for the ravens, we excluded the very dominant ones, and we excluded the very subordinate ones. So we just used those that are somehow in the middle, and where it's quite likely that rank changes can occur. So we paid attention to this point, but a very good question.
Right. Well, thank you. I think that's fascinating how different ravens are coming up with their own ways of showing off. Thanks.
Yes, question up the back there.
Good point. Yes, we have quite good data from this from captivity that we can show kin effects in the way in the first year or years. So first 1 to 2 years there are kin effects. So basically they prefer to hang out with the siblings. They prefer to help their siblings. But nevertheless, when you have, let's say, 3 sips, this doesn't mean that you treat all of them equally. You may bond with one of them. So one of them is your close buddy, the other 2 are just your siblings. You may help them eventually a little bit, and you may want to hang out with them, but it's not the same kind of quality of a relationship as you have with the one sibling which you really use as an alliance partner. So this is point 1. Point 2 is we just got from the Avery, the newest analysis, that the early phase in development, when they actually start meeting non-kin, seems also to be very, very important, because they have preferences for this in this early. So for those birds that they meet in this early familiarization phase later on, a couple of years later, we can find preferences here. So this is the first time when we started manipulating, and this is what we will do in the near future much more intensively. So I can say something about this maybe in 3-4 years. However, it seems that both kin is important, non-kin is important, and most critically is the familiarization period, when you get access to whom. And in the wild, we just did the genetics, and it seems that kin is playing a role, particularly in the younger birds, but it's not comparable to what we know, for instance, from primates or from whales, where they have these big matrilines or this kind of whatever, or also in the males, you know, that they are that related individuals are much closer to each other. They are the relatives, so it's really important for the siblings, it seems, of the same year. And again, in the first year or first 1.5 years, 2 years. They tend to hang out more often, and maybe also help each other more often, but this we still need to confirm in the wild. So there are some effects, but not as strong as we know from primates. But it has always been said in the corvids there is no kin effect. That's not true. It is. In the non-breeder groups of corvids, sorry.